The rainforest hummed with the low, rhythmic buzz of insects and the occasional haunting cry of howler monkeys. Deep in its verdant heart, hidden beneath layers of dense foliage, was a facility that shouldn't exist. The compound, a stark blend of steel and glass, sat like a futuristic scar on the untouched landscape. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed as fiercely as the jungle outside, illuminating lab tables cluttered with vials, syringes, and enough computers to run a small nation. Dr. Evelyn Kane leaned over a desk, furiously typing with one hand while cradling a baby iguana in the other. "Dance, little guy," she coaxed, grinning as the tiny reptile awkwardly wiggled its limbs. "Come on, you've got moves. Viral video gold here. Maybe then this lab'll finally get a decent budget." "Evelyn." A lab assistant barreled through the sliding doors, nearly tripping over his untied sneakers. "You've got to see this." It worked. Kane's grin widened as she handed the iguana to a bewildered intern. "Define worked, Doug. Last time you said that, you flooded the isolation chamber with ethanol fumes." "This is different," Doug stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "It's Marcus. He's, just come see." Marcus stood in the isolation chamber, the sterile, glass-enclosed room reserved for testing the most volatile experiments. But he didn't look like the man who'd been wheeled in a week ago, shackled and scowling. His physique was nothing short of monstrous. Muscles rippled beneath his skin like coiled cables, and his shoulders looked broad enough to carry the weight of a car. His skin had taken on a faint greenish hue, like a reptile's, and when he turned toward the observation window, his pupils narrowed into slits. Kane tapped on the glass. "Hey, big guy. How are you feeling?" Marcus tilted his head, then raised one massive hand to his face. He flexed his fingers experimentally, the claws at their tips glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Stronger," he said, his voice gravelly but clear. "Faster. Like I could run forever." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Kane muttered, jotting down notes. "You're still technically human." "Mostly." Doug stood behind her, vibrating with excitement. He bench-pressed the hydraulic test rig. With one hand. "Of course he did," Kane said absently, her mind racing. They'd been tinkering with the Dino gene formula for months, painstakingly splicing strands of prehistoric DNA into human genomes. The military had wanted soldiers who were stronger, faster, and unbreakable. And here he was, their first viable success. But as Kane peered closer, her stomach twisted. There was something unsettling about Marcus. The way he moved, too fluid, too animal. She brushed the thought aside. The project was finally working. What could go wrong? By the next morning, word of Marcus's transformation had spread through the facility like wildfire. Lab techs buzzed around him, scanning, measuring, and collecting samples. Marcus tolerated it all with a stoic detachment, his slit pupils darting from face to face. Kane watched from the observation deck above, sipping coffee as her colleague, Dr. Robert Liu, joined her. "I hear our miracle boy can break steel now," Liu said, his tone flat. "Yup." Kane gestured with her mug. "And he can run faster than a cheetah, heal like a lizard, and probably bench press you into next week." Liu didn't smile. "And you're not worried?" "Worried about what?" "That you're playing God." Kane snorted. "Please. If God wanted us to have soldiers like Marcus, he'd have left dinosaurs around for us to tame. Maybe he didn't because it was a bad idea." "Oh, don't start with the ethical hand-wringing. You've been on this project as long as I have." Liu sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'm saying we should slow down. These changes, strength, speed, reflexes, they're incredible. But the aggression levels in his neural scans, they're spiking. He's an ex-con. Of course his aggression levels are high. It's more than that." Liu turned, his eyes grave. I'm telling you, Evelyn, the Dino gene isn't just rewriting his body. It's rewiring his brain. Within weeks, Marcus wasn't alone. The Dino gene formula was injected into dozens of new recruits, volunteers who were mostly prisoners trading their participation for reduced sentences. The results were astounding. Men and women alike emerged from the chamber stronger, faster, and tougher than any human could dream of being. They were dubbed the Dino Warriors, and military officials flocked to the facility to see them in action. On demonstration day, Marcus led his squad into the training arena, where dummies and obstacle courses awaited. From the viewing gallery, generals and CEOs watched, their faces lighting up as the Dino Warriors tore through the course like feral predators. "That's it," one general barked. "This is the future of warfare." Marcus, standing below the observation deck, suddenly looked up. His eyes locked on Kane. "You think we're just weapons," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. Kane frowned. "You're part of something bigger than yourself, Marcus. You're proof of evolution in action." "Evolution," Marcus repeated, his lips curling into a chilling smile. "That's right. We're not just soldiers. We're the next step." Before Kane could respond, Marcus let out a guttural roar. The other Dino warriors joined in, their voices blending into a primal cacophony. For a moment, the generals looked thrilled. Then one of them leaned toward a microphone. "Enough. Stand down." Marcus turned slowly, his reptilian eyes narrowing. "No," the general blinked. "What did you say?" Marcus flexed his claws. "We're not your pawns. We don't take orders from inferior species." Kane's stomach dropped. "Marcus, stand down." But Marcus wasn't listening. With a sudden burst of speed, he lunged toward the observation deck, scaling the wall like a gecko. Panic erupted as guards opened fire, but the bullets ricocheted off Marcus's scaly skin. "This is our world now," Marcus growled as he smashed through the reinforced glass. "And you'll thank us when we rule it." As alarms blared, the Dino warriors tore through the facility, disabling security systems and overpowering the guards. By the time the dust settled, Marcus and his army were gone, vanishing into the rainforest with weapons, supplies, and a chilling manifesto. Humanity was no longer fit to rule the earth. Kane sat in her shattered office, staring at the wreckage. Lou paced behind her, his face pale. "I warned you," he said. "They're not human anymore." Kane didn't respond. She was too busy replaying Marcus's words. "We're the next step." She rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of what they'd unleashed. "We need to stop them." "How?" "They're faster, stronger, and smarter than us. And they're mutating. Did you see Marcus's tail? We'll figure it out." Kane stood, grabbing her lab coat. "We have to. Before they figure out how to make more." Lou frowned. "And if we can't?" Kane didn't answer. She didn't need to. In her gut, she knew, if they failed, humanity wouldn't just lose control of evolution. It would lose everything. Under the unforgiving sun of the Peruvian rainforest, the lab facility burned. Tendrils of black smoke curled into the sky, and the sound of the jungle seemed muted as though the ecosystem itself was holding its breath. Evelyn Kane stood on the facility's edge, her gaze fixed on the tree line where Marcus and the Dino warriors had vanished hours before. Somewhere out there, her creations were regrouping, growing stronger, and plotting their next move. "Dr. Kane," Captain Ellis's gruff voice pulled her from her thoughts. The disgraced ex-soldier had been sent to oversee the lab's operations months ago, but now he was the closest thing they had to a tactical leader. "If we're going after them, we'll need more than scalpels and pipettes. What's left of security is barely hanging on." Kane turned, forcing herself into action. The wreckage of her lab was a grim reminder that she couldn't afford to hesitate. "We don't need to go after them right now. We need to stop them from replicating the formula." "They took samples," Lou interrupted, stepping forward. His expression was grim, his tone clipped. Every batch of Dino gene. If Marcus figures out how to synthesize it, he will, Kane said, her voice tight. He's not just a soldier anymore. He's something else. Something smarter. Ellis shook his head. Then we've got a ticking clock. We either find them before they start injecting others, or we figure out how to neutralize that formula. What's the plan, Doc? Kane hesitated, her mind racing. The formula had been her life's work, an impossible breakthrough in genetics that had turned into a nightmare. Now, she had to undo it, dismantle every part of it before Marcus made the leap from predator to king. We go after them, she said finally. But not to fight. Not yet. We track them, figure out their movements, and sabotage their efforts to reproduce the formula. If they lose the ability to make more of themselves, we stand a chance. Lou crossed his arms. And if they don't? Kane glanced at him, her jaw tight. Then we're all extinct. Marcus stood at the center of a crumbling military depot, the concrete around him cracked and overgrown with vines. His Dino warriors were scattered, securing the perimeter and dragging in crates of weapons scavenged from the facility. The scent of rust and oil mingled with the earthy tang of the jungle, and the rhythmic pounding of their claws on concrete echoed like a heartbeat. One of the warriors approached, a woman with sharp, scaled features and bright yellow eyes. Raptor King, she said, addressing Marcus with the title they'd given him. The humans will come for us. Marcus grinned, baring teeth that were unnervingly sharp. Let them. They can't stop what we've started. They have numbers, the warrior countered. Resources. We may be stronger, but they will not go down easily. They won't have to, Marcus said, his tone calm, almost amused. When we finish evolving, we won't need to fight. We'll be what they were always meant to fear. Apex predators. He turned toward a makeshift lab his warriors were assembling in the depot's old supply room. Stolen equipment was scattered across tables, and vials of Dino gene glowed faintly under dim lights. Marcus ran a clawed finger along one of the vials, his expression contemplative. This is just the beginning, he said softly. The first step. We'll perfect the formula. And when we do, he trailed off, his slit pupils narrowing as he imagined the future. When we do, the Earth will belong to us. Back at the remains of the lab, Kane, Lou, and Ellis were piecing together what resources they had left. The surviving staff was small, a handful of technicians, a few security personnel, but they worked tirelessly under Kane's direction. I need everything we have on the Dino gene serum, Kane said, poring over digital files on a salvaged tablet. Every reaction, every mutation we've cataloged. Lou frowned as he sifted through physical records, most of which were singed or torn. Even if we find it all, do you really think we can reverse it? That serum is too stable. It's designed to integrate at the cellular level. Then we find another way, Kane snapped. A weakness. Something they can't override. Biology isn't perfect. There's always a loophole. Ellis leaned against a table, arms crossed. In my experience, loopholes get you killed. These things don't think like soldiers anymore. They think like predators. You don't outsmart something like that. Kane shot him a glare. Then what do you suggest? Let them breed us out of existence? No, Ellis straightened, his expression hard. I suggest we figure out where they're hiding, hit them fast, and take back those samples before they do any more damage. They'll see you coming a mile away, Lou said. Not if we move smart, Ellis countered. We don't need to win. We just need to cripple their operation. Kane sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. She hated that Ellis was right. Marcus's group wouldn't wait. They'd adapt, grow stronger, and strike the moment they were ready. All right, she said. We'll split up. Lou and I will work on a counter serum. Ellis, you'll take a team and track them. But no engagements unless absolutely necessary. We can't afford to lose anyone else. Ellis nodded, already moving toward the armory to gather supplies. Hope you're ready, Doc, he said over his shoulder. Because if we screw this up, we won't get a second chance. The jungle was alive with sound as Ellis and his small team trekked through the underbrush. They moved quietly, their eyes scanning for signs of movement. Tracks were easy to find, massive footprints with clawed edges, too large and too precise to be anything but Dino warriors. Looks like they headed north, one of the soldiers muttered, crouching beside a deep imprint in the soil. Ellis nodded, gripping his rifle tighter. Keep your eyes open. They're watching us, even if we can't see them. He was right. Hidden among the trees, a pair of yellow eyes blinked. The warrior perched silently, its claws gripping the branch like talons. It watched as the humans moved beneath it, its head tilting in curiosity. When the group disappeared from view, the warrior dropped to the ground, landing silently on all fours. It sniffed the air, then sprinted toward the depot to warn the others. Marcus would be pleased. Ellis crouched low in the thick underbrush, the barrel of his rifle resting against his shoulder as his eyes scanned the horizon. The humid jungle buzzed with life, but the unnatural silence among his team was deafening. He gestured for the group to halt, his hand slicing the air in a sharp motion. Everyone froze, their weapons drawn, and their eyes darting nervously toward the dense foliage ahead. They're close, Ellis muttered, his voice barely audible. He motioned for one of his scouts, a wiry young soldier named Vasquez, to move forward. Vasquez nodded and crept ahead, his steps nearly silent on the damp ground. Moments later, the sound came. A low, guttural growl, so faint it could have been mistaken for the wind. But Ellis knew better. He raised his hand again, signaling the group to form a defensive circle. The growl deepened, reverberating through the trees, followed by the unmistakable crack of a branch snapping under something heavy. They're flanking us, Ellis whispered, his heart pounding. The first attack came fast, a blur of green and black as a Dino warrior leapt from the underbrush, its claws flashing in the dappled sunlight. Vasquez shouted, firing wildly as the creature slammed into him, sending them both crashing to the ground. The team opened fire, their bullets ricocheting off the warrior's scaled skin as it roared, the sound primal and deafening. Fall back. Ellis shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The soldiers scrambled, retreating into the denser parts of the jungle as the warrior's comrades emerged, their movements terrifyingly fluid. Ellis fired as he ran, hitting one square in the chest. It staggered but didn't fall, instead letting out an enraged snarl before vanishing into the trees. By the time the group regrouped, they were down 2 soldiers. Ellis gritted his teeth, sweat streaming down his face. They couldn't keep this up. The Dino warriors were stronger, faster, and seemingly impervious to small arms fire. We need to keep moving, Ellis said, his voice hoarse. They'll pick us off one by one if we don't get out of here. But where do we go? One of the soldiers asked, panic edging into her voice. They're everywhere. Ellis didn't have an answer. He glanced up at the towering trees above them, knowing full well the warriors could be watching from the canopy. He didn't like the odds, but they had to keep going. Every step forward was another chance to find Marcus and end this nightmare. Back at the remains of the lab, Kane sat hunched over her workstation, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she sifted through data. The counter-serum was theoretically possible, but every time she ran the simulation, the results were catastrophic. The Dino gene was too deeply integrated into the subject's DNA. Anything strong enough to neutralize it would destroy the host in the process. We're running out of time, Lou said, pacing behind her. His face was pale, his movements restless. Ellis's team hasn't checked in, and for all we know, Marcus is already mass-producing the serum. I know, Kane snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. She took a deep breath, rubbing her temples. Sorry. It's just, every solution I come up with ends in the same place. Death. Lou stopped pacing, his expression softening. You can't save everyone, Evelyn. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and determination. These people didn't ask to become monsters. We did this to them. I did this to them. I have to fix it. Lou hesitated, then nodded. Then let's start thinking outside the box. There has to be a way to exploit their biology. Every strength comes with a weakness, right? Kane's gaze drifted to the screen, where a series of genome sequences pulsed in rhythmic waves. Strengths and weaknesses. Survival and adaptation. The Dino gene had been designed to optimize its host, but what if the very thing that made the warriors unstoppable could be turned against them? Pheromones, she murmured, her mind racing. What? Lou asked, stepping closer. They've been bonding, haven't they? Pack behavior. It's in their DNA, part of the dinosaur instincts we spliced in. If we could disrupt their pheromonal communication, throw their hierarchy into chaos, it might give us a chance. Lou frowned. That's a big if. You're talking about manipulating something we barely understand. It's a chance, Kane said, her voice firm. And right now, that's all we've got. Marcus stood at the heart of the depot, watching as his warriors worked to refine the stolen Dino gene formula. The makeshift lab was crude, but progress was being made. He could see it in the way his followers moved, their mutations accelerating with each passing day. Claws lengthened, scales thickened, and some even began to grow rudimentary tails, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Humanity still outnumbered them, still clung to its fragile grasp on power. To truly take their place as Earth's apex predators, they needed more. More warriors, more evolution, Raptor King, one of his lieutenants said, bowing his head as he approached. We've picked up their trail. A scouting team, moving through the southern jungle. Marcus's lips curled into a predatory smile. Let them come. We'll deal with them when they arrive. The lieutenant hesitated. If they find us, they might call for reinforcements. Then we make sure they don't leave, Marcus said, his voice cold. He turned toward the lab, his gaze falling on the glowing vials of serum. Soon, it wouldn't matter what the humans did. Evolution was on his side. Ellis's team stumbled into a clearing, their breaths ragged and their nerves frayed. The jungle had been relentless, the Dino warriors always one step ahead. But now, finally, they could see signs of the depot, rusted fencing, overgrown structures barely visible through the foliage. We're close, Ellis said, his voice a low whisper. Stay sharp. The soldiers nodded, tightening their grips on their weapons. Every shadow felt alive, every sound a potential threat. As they moved closer, Ellis's gut told him something was wrong. It was too quiet. The jungle's usual symphony of sounds had vanished, replaced by an oppressive silence. Ambush, he realized, but the realization came too late. The first warrior struck from above, dropping onto one of the soldiers with a bone-crunching impact. The team scattered, firing wildly as more warriors emerged from the shadows, their roars filling the air. Ellis dove behind a fallen tree, his heart racing as he fired at one of the creatures. The bullets barely slowed it down. He cursed under his breath, knowing they were outmatched. But he couldn't retreat. Not now. They were too close to the depot, too close to stopping Marcus. Hold the line, he shouted, his voice hoarse. We can't let them win. The jungle erupted into chaos, the battle raging as human ingenuity clashed with prehistoric ferocity. The clearing was chaos. Gunfire cracked like thunder, flashes of light punctuating the gloom beneath the canopy. The Dino warriors moved like shadows, their speed and agility far outstripping the soldiers trying to hold them back. Ellis pressed himself against the ground, rifle braced against his shoulder, as he fired at a warrior barreling toward him. The bullet struck its chest, but it barely faltered, snarling as it lunged. Ellis rolled at the last second, the warrior's claws slashing inches from his face. He grabbed his combat knife and drove it upward into the creature's side. It roared, a guttural, ear-splitting sound, and backhanded him with enough force to send him skidding across the dirt. Pain lanced through his ribs as he struggled to his feet, blood trickling from a gash on his temple. The creature turned toward him again, its yellow eyes gleaming with predatory intent. "Come on," Ellis muttered, gripping his knife tightly. "Let's see how tough you really are." Before the warrior could strike, one of Ellis's team members, a hulking soldier named Ramirez, tackled it from the side, slamming the creature into a tree. Ramirez shouted for the others to keep moving as he wrestled with the warrior, giving Ellis just enough time to gather his bearings. Ellis scrambled toward the edge of the clearing, where Vasquez was crouched behind a fallen log, frantically reloading his weapon. "The depot's close," Ellis hissed, dropping beside him. "We can't hold them off much longer." "We're not holding anything," Vasquez shot back, panic in his voice. "They're wiping us out." Ellis grabbed him by the vest. "Pull it together. We need to reach that lab and take out the formula. If we don't, none of us are getting out of this alive." Vasquez nodded, swallowing hard, and followed Ellis as they pushed toward the depot. Behind them, the sounds of the fight grew louder: roars, screams, the sharp crack of breaking bone. Ellis didn't look back. He couldn't. He had to trust that Ramirez and the others would buy them the time they needed. They emerged onto the depot's perimeter, the rusted fence looming ahead. Ellis signaled for Vasquez to cover him as he cut through the chain links with a pair of bolt cutters. The sound was agonizingly loud in the stillness, but there was no other way. Once the gap was wide enough, they slipped through and crept toward the main building. Inside, the depot was eerily quiet. Crates were stacked haphazardly, and the faint glow of makeshift equipment lit the dark interior. Ellis's heart raced as he scanned the area, his rifle raised. If Marcus was here, he wasn't making his presence known. "We need to find those vials," Ellis whispered. A shadow moved in the corner of his vision. He spun, but it was too late. Something slammed into him, knocking the rifle from his hands and sending him sprawling. Marcus stepped into the dim light, towering over him. His body was a grotesque blend of human and dinosaur, his scaled skin glistening, his claws dripping with blood. He looked down at Ellis with a smirk that was almost human. "Brave," Marcus said, his voice low and gravelly. "But foolish." Ellis scrambled backward, fumbling for his knife. "You're just a thug with a science experiment gone wrong," he spat. "You think this makes you better than us?" Marcus tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "This doesn't make me better. It makes me inevitable." He lunged, but before he could strike, Vasquez opened fire. The bullets slammed into Marcus's chest, forcing him back, though they didn't seem to do much damage. Marcus snarled, turning toward Vasquez with a look of fury. "Run!" Ellis shouted, but Vasquez didn't budge. He kept firing, his face set with grim determination. Marcus roared and charged, his claws ripping through the air. Ellis had no choice but to abandon cover, grabbing his rifle and aiming for the vials on the table behind Marcus. That he fired, the bullets shattering glass. The vials exploded in a spray of fluorescent liquid, the formula spilling across the floor. Marcus froze, his expression twisting with rage. "No," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the depot. Ellis didn't hesitate. He grabbed Vasquez and hauled him toward the exit, his mind racing. They'd destroyed the vials, but it wouldn't be enough. Marcus was still standing, still a threat. And worse, there was no guarantee he hadn't already created more. As they burst back into the jungle, Ellis felt a flicker of hope. They'd bought themselves time, barely, but time was enough. If Kane's plan worked, if she could finish the counter serum, they might still have a chance. Back at the lab, Kane and Lou worked tirelessly, the air around them thick with tension. The pheromone disruptor was almost complete, its design cobbled together from salvaged equipment and raw ingenuity. Kane's hands trembled as she connected the final wires, her mind racing with doubts. What if it didn't work? What if they were too late? "It'll work," Lou said, as if reading her thoughts. "It has to." Kane nodded, though she didn't feel convinced. They were out of options, out of time. The only thing left was to try. Ellis's voice crackled over the radio, pulling her from her thoughts. Kane, we're coming in hot. Marcus knows we're onto him. We destroyed some of the vials, but, a roar sounded in the background, cutting him off. The transmission went dead. Kane's heart dropped. She grabbed the disruptor and turned to Lou. We have to move. You're insane, Lou said, though he was already following her. If Marcus is on the warpath, we won't stand a chance. We don't have a choice, Kane shot back. If we don't stop him now, we won't get another shot. They loaded the disruptor into a transport vehicle, the engine roaring to life as they tore through the jungle. The device was untested, unstable, but it was all they had. As they neared the depot, the sound of gunfire and roars grew louder. Ellis and Vasquez were pinned down near the entrance, their ammunition nearly spent. Kane slammed on the brakes, grabbing the disruptor and jumping out of the vehicle. She set it on the ground and activated it, the device emitting a low-frequency hum that quickly built into a piercing whine. The reaction was immediate. Marcus and his warriors froze, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. They clutched their heads, roaring in pain as the pheromone disruptor scrambled their senses. Kane watched as Marcus staggered, his claws tearing at his own skin in frustration. You think this will stop me? He growled, his voice trembling with fury. You can't stop evolution. Kane stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. You're not evolution. You're a mistake. Before Marcus could respond, the disruptor overloaded, sending out a shockwave that knocked everyone to the ground. Kane hit the dirt hard, her vision swimming. When she looked up, Marcus was on his knees, his strength finally failing. His warriors lay scattered, unconscious or dead. It was over. Kane let out a shaky breath, her body trembling with exhaustion. She turned to Lou, who was slumped against the transport vehicle, and gave him a weary nod. They'd done it. The nightmare was over, but as the jungle fell silent, a single thought lingered in Kane's mind: evolution never truly stopped. And neither would the consequences of what they'd unleashed.